He had never held a girl before. He was not terrified. He had used that up earlier when he had carried her in and kicked the door shut behind him, and had heard the steady drip of blood from her soaked skirt, and before that when he had thought her dead there on the curb, and again when she made that sound, that sigh or whispered moan. He had brought her in, and when he saw all that blood, he had turned left, turned right, put her down on the floor, his brains all clabbered and churned and his temples a-thump with the unaccustomed exercise. All he could act on was, "Don't get blood on the bedspread." He turned on the overhead light and stood for a moment, blinking and breathing hard. Suddenly, he leaped for the window to lower the blind against the street light staring in and all other eyes. He saw his hands reach for the blind and checked himself. They were red and ready to paint anything he touched. He made a sound, a detached part of his mind recognizing it as the exact duplicate of that agonized whisper she had uttered out there on the dark, wet street, and leapt to the light switch, seeing the one red smudge already there, knowing as he swept his hand over it he was leaving another. He stumbled to the sink in the corner and washed his hands, washed them again, every few seconds, looking over his shoulder at the girl's body and the thick, flat finger of blood which crept, curling toward him over the linoleum. This story is upsetting.
Yeah. Although it's sort of like you read the first part and you're like, I immediately know where this is going.
Well, for me, I was like, I read the first part, and by first part, I mean like the first 99%. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't understand how this is a horror story. And then it ended, and I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I think it's part of it's the optimistic part of my brain that's just like, well, I guess it's just a happy ending or something, but then no, it's not a happy ending.
I mean, the first time he got upset because she was sitting up in the bed, I was like, this isn't good. Actually, the beginning of the story, I was like, this isn't good.
Right, but it's such a Beauty and the Beast parallel that I was like, I mean, Beauty and the Beast ends with her being like, it ends happy. So I don't know. I was thinking like maybe this is some kind of like weird like, but then at the end I was like, no, it's kind of like Sturgeon saying things just don't work out that way.
Yeah.
Also, this character is far, far worse off than the Beast from Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
His brain doesn't really work that well. Mm-hmm. But first of all, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro time. It's Del Toro time. We keep forgetting to say that. Even though in the last episode...
Because it's really not Del Toro time.
In the last episode, you were like, we're going to forget to say the intro. And I'm like, we're not going to forget to say the intro. And then we forgot to say the intro. Yeah. And by we, I mean me.
I could have said something if I had remembered, but...
That's true. It's the Dark Descent. We're still on the Dark Descent. Medusa in the Shield. Mm-hmm. Our third story about the weird psychology of, like, the internal horror, like the horror of a person's internal monologue, basically, is what we've been covering so far, with 3 protagonists now, including this one, who aren't people I'd probably want to hang out with.
No, not really.
Yeah. Whether or not you're a sort of kind person, but who likes to stab women with swords, or you're a woman who's scared of roaches to such a degree that she ends up drowning in them or making people drown in them. And now today, our first story by Theodore Sturgeon. Would it surprise you to learn that that's not his original name?
It wouldn't surprise me, but I'd be a bit disappointed.
It is not his original name. His original name, which I feel comfortable talking about because he talked about it and gave interviews about it, was Edward Hamilton Waldo. Edward Hamilton Waldo, born in 1918 in New York City, Staten Island. And as he says in an interview with David Hartwell, someone you might be familiar with.
Maybe just a little bit.
David Hartwell, he said, I was born a Waldo and had kind of an interesting family. And he talks a lot about his family. He's actually distantly related to Ralph Waldo Emerson. Like, that's part of his, like, past. I guess the Waldos were very anti-Catholic Church, so they got, like, persecuted a lot, as much as people like that can be, so they kind of like fled to the Americas. His father left his mother when he was 5. She got remarried. She hated the fact that his name reminded her of her ex-husband, So she legally changed his name. So it's not like a pen name. She legally changed his name to Theodore Sturgeon. Sturgeon being the stepfather's name. Who was apparently a nice enough guy, but his mom was like, I mean, if you're so bitter about your marriage, you change your child's name at the age of, I think, 11. But she's like, everyone called him Teddy anyway, so she just changed it to Theodore so they could keep calling him Teddy. He started publishing stories in the late 30s, had his own collections coming out by the late 40s. He wrote Star...
What was his response to the name change?
He seems fine. He seems fine with it. He's like, yeah, that's, I mean, what was he gonna do?
I guess.
And he became a famous writer. He wrote for Star Trek. He wrote for Land of the Lost. He had stories adapted for the new Twilight Zone in the 80s. He wrote what is considered one of the first stories in science fiction to deal with homosexuality. He put a lot of gay subtext into his work. He was friends with all the biggies. And he ended up dying in 1985 of lung fibrosis, probably due to like his constant smoking of cigars. And he was great friends with Kurt Vonnegut, to such a degree that Kurt Vonnegut's character, Kilgore Trout, is based on Theodore Sturgeon, which caused, I guess, a little friction between them because Kilgore Trout was an unhappy, unsuccessful writer who no one liked. And Sturgeon used to be like, it's not really based on me. But then later in life, he was like, yeah, it kind of is. Especially once Vonnegut became more famous than Sturgeon. There was, I guess, a little tension. But we love Kilgore Trout, so whatever. He's had 2 phrases named after him. There's Sturgeon's Law, which is nothing is always absolutely so. And Sturgeon's Revelation, which is 90% of science fiction is crud, but then 90% of everything is crud.
Hey, I mean, once you get a revelation named after you, where else can you go from there?
Yeah, he was married 3 times. He had 2 long-term relationships outside of marriage, and he had 7 kids. He wrote a bunch of novels. He wrote a bunch of novelizations.
How do you have time for writing when you have 7 kids? Nobody knows.
I mean, I don't know how well he took care of those kids.
Fair enough.
And his short stories have been collected into several volumes, and by several, I mean 13. There are 13 volumes in the complete Theodore Sturgeon. So successful guy.
Yeah.
Successful guy. And this is one of his...
novelettes.
This is not a novelette. This is a short story. What was that?
Novelette.
Do you think it's a novelette? It didn't strike me as a novelette.
No, it's a short story. Does a novelette need to follow the structure of a novel?
I would think that would be part of it. Like it has to seem like a novel just sort of like condensed down. Yeah. But this is a short story.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 2 characters.
There's
one location.
Setting.
Yeah. This could be a play.
Yeah.
This could be a teleplay, which we'll get to later.
Oh no.
So basically, this is a story of a guy with a developmental disability who finds a woman who has been thrown out of a car after being stabbed. He takes her home, nurses her back to health, becomes obsessed with keeping her there. She wants to leave. He doesn't want her to leave, not because he's like cruel, but because in his brain, like this is what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to take care of her. Mm-hmm. And in the end, she tells him she has to leave because her life is in danger. Thus, so is his. He pulls her in for a hug, beats her over the head, and puts her back in the bed to nurse her back to health again. Mm-hmm. It's an endless cycle with this guy.
Yep.
Yeah. She should have snuck out when she had the chance, but I guess she didn't know this is where this was going.
I mean, yeah, I guess not. But also the first time that somebody screams at you to stay in bed, maybe go.
Yeah. So he doesn't speak much. He can't speak much. He doesn't have much vocal capacity. But he says, "Got to fix everything" is one of his constant things that he repeats. Yeah, and you need me. He's obsessed with people needing him because, frankly, this is a guy who doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's treated like garbage. Yeah. Greta Garbo. He's treated like the beautiful Greta Garbo, star of Screen. A woman who gave us Women in Suits, which is an attractive thing. In any case, he's not Greta Garbo. He's treated... Yeah, his employers, like, treat him like crap. He's never asked for a day off in his life. He's huge, he's strong, and he's... What I love about this story, the part that just intrigued me to no end, is that his brain doesn't work properly. And because his brain doesn't work properly, he doesn't realize that conducting surgery on a person's arteries is hard. Yeah. He's just like, got to fix this. Figures out how to sew up an artery in a way that seems fairly plausible. He knows he's got to keep it from getting infected. He knows what to buy, but not because he's smart, but because he knows how to fix things. And so it just makes sense to him. He's like, all right, just sew this up. So keep the wound open so I can keep it clean. Sew up her cuts. Fix her head. Good. She is fine. Like, it's wild. It makes sense.
Yeah. No, he then proceeds to beat her over the head and holds her captive, but, it's fine.
Yeah. I'm not saying that what he does is fine. I'm saying that he's not... I don't think... whether or not you know what you're doing... Like, that's, I guess, the court of law always is like, does a person know they are committing a crime, or does a person... Or is there something going on so much in his head that he thinks what he's doing is right? Like, that's, I think, the big question.
He definitely has at least some understanding of the law, because he brings up that the police are going to arrest him if he calls a hospital.
Which is wild, because, like, if he had just contacted the hospital, they'd probably be like, oh, like, clearly this guy didn't stab her, like, or throw her out of a car. Like, thank you, sir, for finding her. I mean, they might treat him like crap, but yeah, it's weird. He reminds me kind of Lenny Lenny from Of Mice and Men. Mm-hmm. Have you read Of Mice and Men?
No.
But you know who Lenny is. Mm-hmm. He's the big guy who accidentally kills things. Means well, understands that he keeps accidentally killing things, but also it's hard to hold him completely at fault, because there's just a lot of things up here that, and by here I mean I'm pointing to my head, up in his head that aren't really connecting. Like, he should definitely go to jail. But I think if someone honestly could figure him out, they'd be like, this guy might need to be like in a psychiatric hospital for life.
I don't know. Psychiatric facilities sometimes are worse than jail.
Right, but at least in a psychiatric facility, he probably wouldn't be able to hurt anyone accidentally. Give him something constructive to do. Like, maybe just, like, set him to work fixing. Give him a job in a hospital. Put a surgical mask over him, put some gloves on him, and just be like, go to town, my friend.
All right, fix this.
They're like, wow, we've had 0% fatality rate. And they're like, wow, what's going on? Then, like, a week later, they're like, all of our patients have been hit over the head and are back in their beds. He doesn't have a name. She never gets a name. The only other characters we see are his like coworkers and employees when he calls in sick to stay with her. Mm-hmm. At first I'm like, oh, this is great. He's like not smart, but he figures things out. Yeah. And then she starts coming to, and he's like, and like forces her back down in the bed. Not because he's mad at her, but because she's breaking these weird rules he's created. Like, it's not that he's super controlling, but only because he's like, no, nothing. I finally found someone who needs me to do something, and they've got to keep needing me. Like, she makes him an amazing breakfast. Mm-hmm. And what does he do?
No.
Yeah. He trashes the house and throws everything away, and she starts crying, and he's like, what's wrong? I don't understand why you're wrong. He's like, there's abusive boyfriend, there's captor, and then there's this guy who's like operating on a whole other level. Yep.
It's not a good situation.
It's not a good situation. Unless, maybe if she was permanently confined to bed, like if she had like a severe brain injury and like couldn't get up, then maybe he's the perfect caretaker because he's just going to take care of you. But if you want any kind of autonomy, yeah, because she slips into bed with him at one point and tries to initiate sex, and he's like having none of it. Like, so, and at that point I was like, okay, like this isn't going to go there. This isn't that kind of a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not like a weird like predator. He's just this guy. In fact, in the beginning, I thought he had hurt her because they set it up that way.
Yeah.
But no, he just found her.
What time period does this take place?
I assume the time period it was written in the 1960s.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, because this was first published. Bright Segment. It was called Bright Segment. I don't think we even mentioned that.
Yeah, this is a story Bright Segment by Theodore Sturgeon, everyone.
Yes. 1955. It originally appeared in his collection called Caviar, which is, I guess, if you're going to publish a bunch of your short stories and call them Caviar, you got to be pretty confident.
Well, maybe you have to be really unconfident because caviar is gross.
Yeah, maybe he hates caviar, and he's like, oh, you suck. I'm as bad as caviar. I don't think that's the case. Yeah, first published in Caviar, and then just published in Caviar over and over again. Like years later, 5 years later, it was published in Shock magazine, a magazine of terrifying tales. And you know what? It is terrifying.
Yeah.
It is kind of terrifying. It's been compared to Beauty and the Beast and Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You saw those parallels?
Yeah. Well, I can see them. I didn't connect them in my head while I was reading it because I was like, this is gross. Mm-hmm. I skimmed through some of the medical stuff because it was a bit much.
I thought I almost skimmed through it, and then I went back and made myself read it just because I was actually very curious as to how they justified it. And that was when I was like, oh, I guess, okay.
I read the stitches and the stuff like that because that was interesting. I just skimmed through the description of all the blood.
There's a lot of blood.
I was like, I don't need to know how the blood looks coming towards you, sir. I don't.
It does do a good job at putting you into his head. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not a good thing. It's not a comfortable thing. I don't want to be in this man's head. I don't want to be in this man's house.
I don't want to be in my own head.
Right. I don't want to be in this man's neighborhood unless I get knocked out and have to be taken care of. But then I want someone to know where I am.
Or we want someone to call like the hospital, maybe.
Yeah. It's also very similar to Misery in a way. Like Stephen King's Misery, man is injured, gets taken home by a person who nurses him back to health, but then won't let him leave because she has to take care of him. And if he tries to leave, she gets violent. In fact, it's Misery. This is Misery.
There's a Criminal Minds episode about that.
This is that story. It's just Misery. Maybe it's the OG. I don't know. Bright Segment. It's called Bright Segment because in the very end, like it's like the last page. And remember, this guy has a miserable life. She is confronting him, and he's trying to keep her in the apartment. And he says, "You don't go. You need me." And she says, "You don't need me, and I don't need you. It comes to that, honey. It's the way you fixed it. It's the right way. Can't you see that?" And he starts crying. She starts yelling because she's like, "Oh, this is killing me that you are so upset." And then it says, he stumbled across the room and caught himself on the lower shelf of the china closet. He looked back and forward along the dark, echoing corridor of his years, stretching so far and drearily, and he looked at this short, bright segment slipping away from him. And that's when he hugs her and then smashes her over the head. But it is like, so like this is a story about like, though he says he's like in his 50s. This is like the one moment ever in his life in which there was light. And how dangerous that is. Like, it's that thing of like, well, now I have to hold on to it forever.
Yeah. Truly, this is a story about how mental health support needs to increase.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And clearly this is 1950s representation of mental health, where there's still like a lot of fear over people who have mental disabilities. as opposed to like them being, of course, the most vulnerable members of society.
Yep.
As opposed to the people who are more often the perpetrators. Someone like this guy, I mean, unless he was probably like goaded into hurting someone, I doubt this is the guy you should be afraid of.
Yeah.
And if you goad this guy into hurting you, sorry, dude.
Yeah, what? Stop goading people into hurting you. Really?
There's a great comic book called The Goon, and the character of the Goon is very much like this guy. He's huge, he's violent, he doesn't talk much, and he is very caring in his own weird, upsetting way. Mm-hmm. The Goon. But yeah, I would say of the 3 protagonists we've had so far, I would say of the 3 stories we've read so far in this book, this is the one that I find the scariest so far.
Yeah. I think I honestly didn't pick up that he was disabled throughout most of the story right away.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I guess I was just too freaked out by everything else that was happening. I got it at the end, finally. I was like, oh, wait, hang on.
Well, it really stands out when he tries to talk and you realize that he can't really speak. Mm-hmm. And she can't speak initially because she has a brain injury.
Yeah.
And so initially they're kind of on even ground. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was going to be, I don't know, maybe they discovered they could control roaches. I'm not sure where I thought it was going to end up going. I
think I was so freaked out because I immediately knew where it was going. Mm. I don't know. I guess I have too much media that I've consumed has been a similar like tale, and too many like warnings as a woman, I guess. Just immediately put it into my head.
Right.
So I was too freaked out by that to really pick up on a lot of the intricacies of the story.
Yeah, I guess I'm the eternal optimist when it comes to reading. I'm like, it's got to all turn out for the best. It also reminds me of, have you ever seen Tucker and Dale versus Evil, the movie? It starts the same way. A young woman gets knocked out. Guy who doesn't talk very well, is very awkward and uncomfortable, takes her back to his place and nurses her back to health. She wakes up and freaks out. Tucker and Dale versus Evil, of course, he is a very nice man. Yeah, I wonder if this is like the text of the Misery Criminal Minds mold. I wonder if this is like, oh yeah, this is a cool idea. Like we can make scarier.
I wonder. No, there has to be like some ancient Greek tale before this. Come on.
I mean, Captivity Tales, obviously. Beauty and the Beast, obviously. Mm-hmm. I guess I mean like in modern times, like as far as like modern horror goes. You tell me. Somebody tell me. Sturgeon experts, tell me. Tell me. Right now. I'll wait. The phone lines are open. It's also the first story we've read so far that doesn't have any supernatural elements. Mm-hmm. Or supernatural elephants.
No supernatural elephants in this room.
No. If you're seeing any, get help. I'll include a number in the show notes.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned a teleplay of this.
Good.
It is impossible to find. Mm-hmm. But let me see, I will pull it up. In 1974, the French director Christian de Chalon, as part of a TV series called Histoire Insolite, I think Strange Histories or Weird Stories, something like that, directed Parcelle Brillante, which means brilliant parcel or bright segment, which is a direct adaptation of this story starring Gert Frobe, who played Goldfinger in the movie Goldfinger, and Juliette Berthaud as the young woman. And there's hardly any information about it out there because it's impossible to find. Because Theodore Sturgeon, there were all kind of weird rights issues with it. And Theodore Sturgeon himself said it was made into a 58-minute TV film in France with Gert Frobe cast as the old man and doing an extraordinary piece of acting. Further, the French shot it almost exactly the way I wrote it, and I wrote it despairing that it could not be filmed. American TV could never handle that much blood and that much skin. I wish you could see it. I own the only print in North America, but I can't use it for admission or release it to the net or on cable. I can, however, use it as a lecture resource, a 3-hour performance during which I read the story up to but not including the ending. Then I challenge the students, creative writing, scripting, directing, cinematography, what have you, to suggest what they would include or change or eliminate if this were their film. Then I show the film, read my ending, and launch a Q&A. It takes about 3 hours, and it costs, but I understand it's worth the nut. And this is from the book Bright Segment, which is... I just think that's amazing. Like, it's this sort of like lost film that we're not allowed to watch. Theodore, he mentions the net. I can't release it to the net. So the internet existed. Did anyone secretly film this? I don't know how they would have, but and get it. And I want to see this movie just to see like, because the story takes place all in this guy's mind. How do you put that on film in a way that the author himself is like, it works. It works. Oui, the French. I don't know. If anyone has this, please give it me. I want to see it. I want to see the Bright Segment because I bet it's really a good time.
Yeah.
I just watched a 55-minute adaptation of Bridge to Terabithia for my other podcast. So I am ready to watch heartbreaking things. Next up on that podcast, the 2000 whatever film of Bridge to Terabithia. So I'm raring to go. Show me young women getting killed.
Eventually you get desensitized to it, right?
Look at who you're talking to. I cry at YouTube reactions to movies I've seen. No, I don't get desensitized. Yeah.
I also don't get desensitized to things.
Yeah. That's our curse and our blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Bright Segment.
Really unfortunate representation of people with disabilities, but a spooky story, I guess. And I think if we're going to bring in Guillermo del Toro, here he comes. Hey. hey guy. How you doing? If we're going to bring in Guillermo del Toro, this is the good story to start with.
This is, the protagonist has that kind of like, I can see him doing something with this or like this.
I don't think he would have ended it this way, though.
I think he would have done something to change the ending. Mm-hmm. But this is kind of his bread and butter protagonist.
Yeah.
Misunderstood monster.
I don't think this guy's even a monster, though.
But Del Toro would make him a monster.
Yeah.
He'd be like Bane.
I think this is just an unfortunate representation.
An unfortunate person.
Yeah.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like, it has that weird, like, the person who society thinks is a monster. It has the waifish woman. It has a few Guillermo del Toro like isms.
Yeah.
He could combine it with the roaches somehow. Like, it all takes place in that city.
It's like Hellboy.
Yeah.
He has the big strong guy and then the waifish woman who can control roaches, and they're making an unlikely superhero duo.
Can they get along in the city? Bright Segment. So that's Bright Segment from The Dark Descent. It's an upsetting story. It's just an upsetting story.
In more ways than one.
But I think worth taking a look at. We didn't even... I mean, it's hard to sell. Like, Sturgeon's prose is beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's evocative and hard to read at times because it's so just like graphic. But yeah, a lot of blood, a lot of medical stuff. Probably the most medical story we've read since The Autopsy.
I thought you were just gonna end it there. I was like, you mean the autopsy was?
Yeah. And important to the story. But that's that. What is our next Dark Descent? Medusa
I actually don't know because I don't have the book with me.
Well, then I will tell you, because we are flash forwarding to the 1980s to a little gentleman. He's not little, but to a gentleman named Clive Barker and his short story, Dread. Not Dredd, but Dread, the actual word dread.
Not.
And if you need,
what is the guy's name?
What guy?
Oh, never mind.
Judge Dredd?
Yeah, there you go.
That's who I was referring to.
Yeah, no, I know that. That's why I was I couldn't remember.
Yeah, not Judge Dredd. He doesn't. Yeah, not Judge Dredd. Although I would do a Judge Dredd podcast if I had the druthers. Dredd by Clive Barker, a man who needs no introduction, I would hope. But also a short story that I believe there is a movie based on. So maybe I'll take a look at that. Maybe we'll
get back to the movies in this next
Yeah, maybe
episode.
I'll take a look at that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's any good. So, but definitely...
We've covered bad movies on this show before.
Oh, have we? Antlers, anyone? I watched a bad movie yesterday. I watched the 2009 Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
A remake, reboot, reimagining. Not very good. I know that's sacrilege to a lot of people. I say this as someone who loves me a Jason movie, but not my favorite. So it gets the big thumbs down.
What was it called?
Phil. Friday the 13th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was like a specific title under the installment or anything.
Oh no, it's just the 2009 reboot. But I do know one of the screenwriters, so I went to high school with him. So in any case, I don't blame him.
Who didn't you go to high school with?
Who didn't I go to high school with? You're right. I went to high school with a lot of people who ended up being much more successful than me, but none of them raised a daughter as wonderful as you.
False.
But that's it. That's our story. We'll see you next time with Clive Barker's Dredd. Maybe a little body horror coming into play. It's Clive Barker.
There's already been a lot of body horror coming into play.
Maybe some goops and gloops. We don't know. But until then, I am Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when it's Del Toro time.